All right, chapter 27, Dionysus, Nature and Deeds. At Hera's orders, the Titans seized Zeus's newly born son Dionysus, a horned child crowned with serpents, and, despite his transformations, tore him into shreds. These they boiled in a cauldron while a pomegranate tree sprouted from the soil where his blood had fallen. But rescued and reconstituted by his grandmother Rhea, he came to life again. Persephone, now entrusted with his charge by Zeus, brought him to King Artemis of Orchomenus and his wife Ino, whom she persuaded to rear the child in the woman's quarters disguised as a girl. But Hera could not be deceived and punished the royal pair with madness, so that Athamas killed their son Lurchus, mistaking him for a stag. B. Then, on Zeus's instructions, Hermes temporarily transformed Dionysus into a kid or a ram and presented him to the nymphs Myrcus, Nisa, Erato, Bromi, and Bacche of Hellesonian Mount Nisa. They tended Dionysus in a cave, cosseted him, and fed him on honey, for which service Zeus subsequently placed their images among the stars, naming them the Hades. It was on Mount Nisa that Dionysus invented wine, for which he is chiefly celebrated. When he grew to manhood, Hera recognized him as Zeus's son, despite the effeminacy to which his education had reduced him, and drove him mad also. He went wandering all over the world, accompanied by his tutor Silenius and a wild army of satyrs and Menades, whose weapons were the ivy twin staff tipped with a pine cone called the Thyrusus, and swords and serpents and fear-imposing bull roarers. He sailed to Egypt, bringing the vine with him, and at Pharaoh's King Protus received him hospitably. Among the Libyans of the Nile Delta, opposite Pharos, were certain Amazonian queens whom Dionysus invited to march with him against the Titans and restore King Ammon to the kingdom from which he had been expelled. Dionysus' defeat of the Titans and restoration of King Ammon was the earliest of his many military successes. C. He then turned east and made for India. Coming to the Euphrates, he was opposed by the king of Damascus, whom he flayed alive, but built a bridge across the river with ivy and vine, after which a tiger sent by his father Zeus helped him across the river Tigris. He reached India, having met with much opposition by the way, and conquered the whole country, which he taught the art of viticulture, also giving it laws and founding great cities. D. On his return, he was opposed by the Amazons, a horde of whom he chased as far as Ephesus. A few took sanctuary in the temple of Artemis, where their descendants are still living. Others fled to Samos, and Dionysus followed them in boats, killing so many that the battlefield is called Panahama. Near Pholium, some of the elephants which he had brought from India died, and their bones are still pointed out. E. Next, Dionysus returned to Europe by way of Phrygia, when his grandmother Rhea purified him of the many murders he had committed during his madness and initiated him into the mysteries. He then invaded Thrace, but no sooner had his people landed at the mouth of the river Strymon than Lycurgus, king of the Edonians, opposed them savagely with an ox goad and captured the entire army except Dionysus himself, who plunged into the sea and took refuge in Thetis' grotto. Rhea, vexed by this reverse, helped the prisoners to escape and drove Lycurgus mad. He struck his own son Dryas dead with an axe in the belief that he was cutting down a vine. Before recovering his senses, he had begun to prune the corpse of its nose and ears, fingers and toes, and the whole land of Thrace grew barren in horror of his crime. When Dionysus, returning from the sea, announced that the barrenness would continue unless Lycurgus were put to death, the Edonians led him to Mount Pangaeum, where wild horses pulled his body apart. Dionysus met with no further opposition in Thrace, but traveled on to his well-beloved Botea, where he visited Thebes and invited the women to join his revels on Mount Cytheron. Pentheus, king of Thebes, disliking Dionysus' dissolute appearance, arrested him together with all his Mænades, but went mad and instead of shackling Dionysus, shackled a bull. The Mænades escaped again and went raging out upon the mountains where they tore calves in pieces. Pentheus attempted to stop him, but inflamed by wine and religious ecstasy, they rent him limb from limb. His mother Agave led the riot, and it was she who wrenched off his head. At Orchomenus, the three daughters of Minyas, by name, Alcitho, Leucippe, and Aristippe, or Aristippe, or Aracino, refused to join in the revels, though Dionysus himself invited them, appearing in the form of a girl. He then changed his shape, becoming successively a lion and bull, a bull and a panther, and drove them insane. Leucippe offered her own son Hippasus as a sacrifice. He had been chosen by lot, and the three sisters, having torn him to pieces and devoured him, skimmed the mountains in a frenzy until at last Hermes changed them into birds, though some say that Dionysus changed them into bats. The murder of Hippasus is annually atoned at Orchomenus in a feast called Agronia, provocation to savagery, when the women devotees pretend to seek Dionysus, and then, having agreed that he must be away with the muses, sit in a circle and ask riddles until the priest of Dionysus rushes from his temple with a sword and kills the one whom he first catches. When all Botea had acknowledged Dionysus' divinity, he made a tour of the Aegean islands, spreading joy and terror wherever he went. Arriving at Icara, he found that his ship was unseaworthy and hired another from certain Tyrrhenian sailors who claimed to be bound for Naxos. But they proved to be pirates and, unaware of his godhead, steered for Asia, intending to sell him there as a slave. Dionysus made a vine grow from the deck and unfold the mast, while ivy twined about the rigging. He also turned the oars into serpents and became a lion himself, filling the vessel with phantom beasts and the sound of flutes, so that the terrified pirates leaped overboard and became dolphins. It was at Naxos that Dionysus met the lovely Ariadne, whom Theseus had deserted, and married her without delay. She bore him Onipion, Thoios, Staphylos, Latromos, Euthynthes, and Tauropolos. Later, he placed his bridal chaplet among the stars. From Naxos he came to Argos and punished Perseus, who at first opposed him and killed many of his followers by inflicting a madness on the Argive women. They began devouring their own infants raw. Perseus hastily admitted his error and appeased Dionysus by building a temple in his honor. Finally, having established his worship throughout the world, Dionysus ascended to heaven and now sits at the right hand of Zeus as one of the 12 great ones. The self-effacing goddess Hestia resigned her seat at the high table in his favor, glad of any excuse to escape the jealous wranglings of her family, and knowing that she could always count on a quiet welcome in any Greek city which it might please her to visit. Dionysus then descended by the way of Lerna to Tartarus, where he bribed Persephone with a gift of myrtle to release his dead mother, Semele. She ascended with him into Artemis's temple at Troezen, but lest other ghosts should be jealous and aggrieved, he changed her name and introduced her to his fellow Olympians as Thyone, Zeus placed an apartment at her disposal, and Hera preserved an angry but resigned silence. Do the footers tomorrow.